is the truth about these claims that King Charles and Queen Camilla are now living completely separate lives? And is there any parallel to the unhappiness in the marriage between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, where people say those two are increasingly living separate lives? Well, Robert Jobson is the godfather of royal reporting. He has covered this marriage for decades. Indeed, he was the man who actually broke the story of the engagement all of those years ago. So Jobbo is the one who has followed at close quarters how this marriage works. But I just want to track how we got here in the first place, because a lot of this speculation and consternation has come after mainstream media reporting, including from Dan Wakeford, the former editor of People magazine and Us Weekly, who conceded that the King and Queen are living separate lives with their own holidays and bedrooms, but he says that this is just sensible and normal in any modern marriage. Watch this.
The King is off painting alone in Balmoral and the Queen is in Greece. Separate vacations and separate lives to some extent. Years ago, this would have been considered controversial, but now it's just sensible for a good marriage. Charles is deep into his annual Scottish stretch, the routine that's defined every one of his summers for decades. Painting, walking, disappearing into the kind of solitude a working monarch rarely gets. Camilla, meanwhile, has gone her own way, holidaying in Greece, as she tends to each year. It's become such a fixture of their marriage that nobody blinks at it anymore, but it's worth pausing on because it says something real about how this particular partnership thrives. Camilla and Charles married in 2005 after one of the most scrutinised courtships in modern royal history. And 20 years later, they're still doing things their own way. Separate bedrooms as a matter of a long-standing royal tradition, separate holidays as a matter of preference.
But it's not just the holidays apart, it is the weekends apart too, something the Daily Mail's royal editor Rebecca English, she is the head of the Royal Rota, attempted to normalise in an answer that has gone viral. Watch this.
Queen Camilla often chooses to spend her weekends at her own house, Ray Mill House, while Charles is often in maybe Sandringham or nearby Ray Mill House in Highgrove. This, I think, prompted C.S. Bollard to ask, why do Charles and Camilla spend weekends apart? Thinking the same thing, Art Studio Girl commented, why does Camilla always spend weekends away from her husband? Rebecca, tell us what your thoughts are, because they are together quite a lot as well.
They are, but they also live quite independent lives, and I don't think it affects their relationship at all. In fact, they've lived for, obviously they've been married for a very long time now, but they've also lived apart. They've been a couple but lived apart for long periods of their life, so it's something they're quite used to. And Ray Mill was bought privately by the Queen after her divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles, so that's kind of her family home.
And Rebecca does acknowledge that this setup looks odd for people, but she says she has learned not to judge.
And there were questions about whether she would keep it on when they got married, because of course it does then require a security detail, so there's extra cost. But she made very clear she wanted to keep it. It's a real bolt hole for her. It's very informal. She has the children over, she has the grandchildren, whereas, the King can potter around his gardens doing his dry stone walling at Highgrove, and he can do his own things. I mean, he does go to Ray Mill as well, but not often. It's where she keeps her dogs, largely during the week. So it's a real home for her from home. And I can understand why it looks a little odd to people, but it actually works for them. And often when you go on a royal tour, if we're landing at Brize Norton in Oxfordshire, which we often do because it's it's where these RAF jets are based, you'll often see two cars turn up and, they'll give each other a kiss. Oh, see you for the weekend, darling, and one will go after one and one will go after the other. And it just works for them, and I've learned not to judge at all.
And Rebecca argues that it is because they spend a lot of time during the week working together.
A high-pressure environment, you've got to make things work for you. You need to escape and...
Well, it is you're right, Luke. It is a really unusual situation where you're not just kind of living together, you're working together. And that comes with pressures. And they've found a way, I think, that makes it work for them.
And her grandchildren need to have somewhere that they feel is theirs, where they can run around. I mean, if her grandchildren want to run around at Windsor or the Palace, it's like, oh, don't knock that vase over. Oh, you can't kick a ball in there, Whereas, when they're at Granny's house, it's Granny's house, and everyone can put on jeans and run around and doesn't have to call anybody ma'am or Royal Highness or anything else.
And Robert Hardman sort of says this is decompression. But I do just want you to watch this moment from Rebecca English, because to me this does sort of unwittingly prove how the Royal Rota relationship really works. She gives the soft coverage and the explanation, and it results in the access.
So it's a sort of decompression, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way of putting it. I remember once during the COVID lockdown doing an interview with the Queen, well, obviously Duchess of Cornwall as she was then, about a particular issue that they wanted to get out there. I think it was about domestic abuse and domestic violence. And I mean, I don't have their phone numbers. The call was put through to me via the press office, but it was clear that she was at Raymond, I think, then. And there was obviously a horse clip-clopping nearby because the dog started barking. And I go, excuse me, Juanette, shut up.
Okay, Robert Jobson, what is the truth about King Charles and Queen Camilla's marriage?
Well, nothing has changed since they started, in all honesty. When I broke the story back in 2005, and one scoop of the year with it, Charles is a very independent man, and I think Camilla, the reason when she kept Rainbow House really was because they pretty much lived independent lives right from throughout this relationship. You know, remember the King recently, a story broke that he spent like 3 or 4 million quid extending her buying the neighbour's house at Raymills so that there was more. She had more space, probably also for the security. So look, this has been going for a long time. A couple of other things worth mentioning is I broke it in my book, actually, the King suffers from sleep apnea. So they're not sleeping together for obvious reasons, I think, most of the time, because he's got a mask on most of the time at night, like he's flying a 40,000 feet. But they do and always have had separate interests. Ever since I remember, she would go to the Greek islands and has been since they were single, or not, they were together but not married. And the Charles would go to Highgrove and spend his time there. Balmoral, I think at the moment, I know for a fact also that she doesn't really like Balmoral at all, the castle. She prefers to stay at Birkhall. Charles, actually, since he's become king, quite likes being at Balmoral and with all the staff there, etc., and the other family. So, look, this is what works for them. If anyone's saying that there's a chance that this is going to end in divorce or it's not going to happen. But the reality is, I think they're both in their very late 70s, Queen pushing towards 80. Nothing's going to change, if people think they live the lives that normal ordinary people do, that they're cozying up on the sofa. Yeah, they watch television together, they do things like that, but they live in a very different world, really. And I don't think any of us can really probably understand it. I mean, the King, I think, probably would have been better if the way he lives, if he'd been on his own. I mean, he's very much a loner, but he has time. They watch television together and things like that. And then she would go off to her house and he'd go off to bed. So I think that does sound odd. And I hear what Rebecca is saying, and I think that they were trying to sort of laugh it all off. But I don't think we can, as mere mortals, judge the way they live their lives, because actually it's completely alien to most of us.
What I think is really fascinating, Jobbo, is that you say it's always been this way. This is how they live. Now, that is very different when you consider the separate lives that we are reporting on Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, because you'll remember, Jobbo, they were so clear, weren't they? Salt and pepper, always together. Do you remember they used to say we would be at the same desk in the office, or they had their desks lined up in Montecito because they always wanted to be together. So there's been a real change with Harry and Meghan, which does seem to contrast what you're saying. This is just how Charles and Camilla have always been.
I think that, to be honest, with the way people, I mean, with people like a more modern couple, a younger couple as well, these are people pushing towards 80, and they're going to do whatever they want. The King has always done what he wants. I mean, his way he lives his life is going to be whoever's with him or whatever partnership's going on. They just have to sort of bow to what he's going to do. And I think that's something that Diana used to struggle with. She couldn't understand, the things they used to say. She used to, even in their private lives, there would be once every 3 weeks, he might come into the bedroom or something. But no, I think that with Charles and Camilla, the reason it's probably quite successful is because she was his mistress, would see him when she saw him. There was a lot of separation even at that time, which probably kept the excitement going, I suppose, of that relationship. But it has pretty much always been the same. That they're not, when she goes off to see her grandkids. Charles is probably very good with grandkids when he has to do the funny voices and then they come for tea and there's an hour with them, and then it's like, okay, that's enough of that, and off he'll go and do his own thing. Whereas if they're over for the whole weekend, which like most grandmums would like to see a lot of their grandkids, their own kids, that gives her that opportunity at Rainbow House, because there's a completely separate family there that are nothing to do with Charles, really, apart from Tom's his godson. But they're not going to be as relaxed. So I can understand it, the way it's worked, because they got married when much later in life, didn't they? So they had their own independence. And I think that, I think it probably does work for them because it's always been like that. And I don't think it's any different, as I say, from day one. I really don't. And I hear what Rebecca's saying, and I sort of laughed it off in a very, bizarre way. Actually, I think it's almost as if they were saying it was the way most people should be. It'd be better for their relationships. No, they're royal. He's the king, and that is the way a lot of royals are. They live completely separate lives, really, and then get together for their public engagements and have their private.
Yeah, and
their private life. But a lot of us wouldn't understand
just like us. Exactly. If they were just like us, Robert, then we wouldn't be so interested and fascinated by them, would we?
But they're just not. They're not just like us. And the fact is, they've got most people probably don't spend a lot of time together because they've only got the one house. So you've got Charles would go off to Romania and where he's got 3 houses, I think. He's got houses in Sandringham, he's got Highgrove, he's got Scotland. So the opportunity to spend a bit of time apart is there. You got to remember when he was married to Diana, there was sometimes, I think we were counting up the times, he'd be away from Diana for months, over months on end, and that's when they had young children. So that was more controversial. I think this one is this 2 quite old people set in their ways with lots of money and the ability to just do what the hell they want to do. And I think that's probably what it comes down to. Is it right? I think you're not going to see them walking down the aisle in Waitrose, pushing the trolley and saying, "What should we have for tea, dear?" But which is a lot of
and I think it is fair to say there is more of that normality with William and Catherine. But look, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, Jobbo, was this very fascinating column by Celia Walden this week, Piers Morgan's wife, but an accomplished columnist in her own right for the Daily Telegraph. Because this is something I've thought a lot, actually. Has Harry's obsession almost with therapy meant he's actually almost misremembered a lot of his upbringing? And she's written this on the back of some fascinating comments in Ruthie Henshaw's new memoir, which actually depict Charles as a very different type of dad than how Harry has depicted Charles in recent years. So I just want to read you a couple of the key excerpts, Jobbo, and then I'll get your take. Celia writes, "What a sweet picture Ruthie Henshaw paints of King Charles's parenting style. In her new memoir, The Showgirl and the Prince, which tells the story of her 5-year relationship with Prince Edward, the 59-year-old stage doyen recalls how warm and hands-on he was with his boys. In one scene, described in vivid detail, Charles was playing rough and tumble with William and Harry in the Balmoral corridors. He clearly loved those boys, and they were squealing with joy as Daddy chased them. Certainly it's a different picture to the one the Duke painted in his own memoir, Spare, even the title of which seems to contain a grievance. And when it was first published 3 years ago, much was made of the claims peppered throughout his early years that the monarch was always a bit checked out, that he had trouble communicating, trouble listening, trouble being intimate face-to-face. He had always given an air of being not quite ready for parenthood," Harry wrote. "And as for single parenthood, Pa was never made for that," all of which cast him in a pretty cold light. Walden goes on, "It was a detail Harry decided to include about the moment his father told him Diana had died, however, that I imagine must have been most hurtful. Pa didn't hug me," he wrote. "He wasn't great at showing emotions. Instead, Charles put his hand on Harry's knee, which he did at least describe as fatherly, hopeful, kind. Recollections inevitably vary, and as always, the truth will be somewhere in between, but I do worry about how harshly therapy culture has made us judge our parents retrospectively, how short-sighted those judgments can often be." And I have to say, Job, I'm completely with Celia Walden on this. You can just tell that Harry's brain has completely been fried by a whole smorgasbord of therapists. And so often therapists immediately, because it's good for their business and it's easy, immediately try and pinpoint issues with your parents. And it's like, that's the reason why everything is wrong. Clearly, Diana dying was a big issue, but you can see the point Celia's making, given Ruthie Henshaw painted a lovely picture of Charles being incredibly intimate.
I mean, from people I spoke to at the time, I think Charles did his best. But he wasn't particularly a tactile, hands-on dad. I don't think, to be honest, in the early years, Diana gave him much space to be that person. And I thought, as he lacks confrontation, hates it, the easiest thing to do would be to allow her to be the dominant parent and the dominant mother, because otherwise it would always lead to friction. I think that there are loads of issues that would go on where he wanted to see his kids after during the separation period, or the period where they would really live in separate lives, and it was arranged, and then she would sort of back out and make it difficult for him to see them. So I think that Ruthie's assessment is probably quite nice from an outsider. Probably he was just dipping in and dipping out, ready to see how he was with his sons. And from people like my friend Ken Wolfe, who was there, I mean, Ken used to play a more avuncular role with them, and his dad used to look on, their father used to look on slightly, quizzically about when they were having rough and tumble fights with the bodyguard, and he would say things like, are you okay with this, Ken? Are they being a bother? So I think he was a little bit distant. I don't think it's necessarily his fault. I think his relationship with his own parents and the king and Queen was, it was distant. But we can all. I think that the problem is Harry is reevaluated in a way of the American psychobabble that goes out there, where you can blame everybody else, it seems, but yourself, because ultimately that doesn't wash with the way that the therapy is supposed to be working. I think the reality is for Harry, I think he's seeing things in an overly negative light. But I don't think Charles was particularly a rough and tumble hands-on dad. He was not there very much, and Diana didn't really want him there for that much either.
Okay, Jobbo, another big story that I know you have been writing on your Substack about this week are these claims in the Mail that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is due to receive a royal ceremonial funeral. This is despite his downfall, and of course the Epstein victims have branded this plan an embarrassment to the Crown. This was reporting from senior Whitehall sources, saying that the former Duke of York remains on a secret government list of royals who will receive high-profile funerals, even though he became a private citizen following the Epstein revelations. This newspaper, they report, understands the controversial arrangement as part of the government's so-called bridge plans, which lay out far in advance and in meticulous detail the funeral arrangements for members of the royal family. Queen Elizabeth's funeral in 2022 followed a blueprint known as Operation London Bridge, while Prince Philip's was Operation Forth Bridge after the bridge close to the Scottish capital. Although the details of the arrangements for Mountbatten Windsor's funeral are unknown, royal experts believe a service would be held at St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, where the funerals of Elizabeth and Prince Philip were held. The 14th century chapel also serves as the venue for baptisms and royal weddings, including that of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in 2018. It is anticipated that Mountbatten Windsor would be buried at the Royal Burial Ground at Frogmore, a 33-acre private cemetery in Home Park, Windsor. Others buried there include King Edward VIII, who abdicated the throne in disgrace in 1936 to marry American socialite Wallis Simpson, who is also buried there. Royal experts believe Mountbatten Windsor's funeral would be similar to that of Princess Margaret, who died in 2002, aged 71. A 400-strong congregation included 30 royals, attended a private service in St George's Chapel. Flags were flown at half-mast at all royal residences throughout a 6-day period of mourning. Ahead of the funeral, the princess's coffin was laid in Kensington Palace, where her family paid their respects. It was draped in Margaret's standard and day spray of white lilies and roses, was then taken to the Queen's Chapel at St James's Palace. The coffin was then driven to Windsor, where police had to erect barriers for 3,000 people to watch the cortege enter the castle gates. In a break from royal tradition, which is unlikely to feature in Mountbatten Windsor's plans, Princess Margaret was later cremated at Slough Crematorium. While not an official state or public occasion, the funeral was a major royal event that was accompanied by a costly policing and security operation. One delicate matter the former Duke may have to ponder in the coming years is who will act as pallbearers during his ceremony. But Jobbo, on your Substack, you have argued that Andrew's reputation was already dead and buried and that there is no need for lists of expensive funerals anymore. So what do you think is going to happen here, Jobbo? Because does this plan have to be reversed officially in that case?
Well, first of all, I mean, clearly his reputation is dead and buried, but also I think that this one would be a bridge too far. They talk about London Bridge and Cambridge, but ultimately, this is probably, in my opinion, a piece of paper is so old that it's probably been typed up and left in a vault somewhere. And you've got to remember that these things, people just follow what was there before, in terms of the way these things will be drawn up. I don't think this would not happen in a million years. There's no way that this would happen, because every funeral would have to be signed off by the current monarch. Remember when there was a big argument whether Diana should get a ceremonial funeral, which was what she actually got. The only state funerals we've had with people like the King, the late Queen, and Churchill, Nelson, people like that. So a state funeral is different in name, not very much in terms of visuals to a ceremonial funeral. Now, there's no way Andrew will get a ceremonial funeral, and I think actually, he's a decade or so younger than the current king. The current king wouldn't sign that off, and I don't believe in a million years that William would sign it off either. And I don't believe Andrew would necessarily think he was warranted or would get one anyway. So I think what we'd probably see is what was described there anyway, which was a funeral, rather like maybe on a much smaller scale, but like at St George's Chapel, but it will be closed. I don't think there will be any access whatsoever. So that's probably what would happen in reality. But I don't see. I personally think they should draw a line under some of these massive events. Funerals like this shouldn't. I mean, are hugely costly. The only real person that should warrant it, in my opinion, would be the king and the head of state, or the queen if she was head of state. I don't even think that after William and Catherine become king and queen, I don't think Camilla should be getting a massive funeral like this, or even Catherine. I think you just limit it to the head of state because of the cost involved, and also the need for it to be such a public event. I don't think it does, apart from the monarch. And we're living we're changing, and the world is changing. And I think the monarchy, in terms of all these London Bridge is falling down and all these things, needs to change with it. Clearly, this is a piece of paper. I can imagine typed up in some dusty room on a typewriter. It's probably so old. It's still going to have, his name is Andrew, Duke of York, or Prince Andrew. So I just don't. I think the easiest way around all of this is to say that the big state or ceremonial funerals are simply reserved for the monarch, and that is it. And let the family deal with everything else after that.
Brilliant stuff. Robert Jobson. Do make sure you subscribe to his brilliant Substack. Of course, he has great royal analysis, but he is also publishing there, self-publishing, his autobiography, chapter by chapter, Walking with Kings, which is a fascinating insight into his career and life as a member of the Royal Rota alongside the royal family through a whole load of different eras. I'm loving it, Jobbo. Thank you so much for being here today.
This video is for news reporting, commentary, and educational purposes. The views expressed are based on publicly available information and personal analysis. We strive for accuracy but encourage viewers to verify information through official sources.